So Amy and I just returned from a short little vacation. They actually call it holiday in Europe. I don't know if you knew that or not. But the way we celebrate Christmas around here, if we called it holiday, we wouldn't get anything done around here, I tell you what. But we like to do that. We like to take off right after Thanksgiving and kind of recharge and celebrate our anniversary. And so this was our 13th year of marriage. And yes, Amy needs a medal because I've never had anyone that wanted to spend 13 years with me, especially not willingly. So yeah, she definitely needs that. But we had some great discussions while we were there about where our lives have ended up right now. And part of that was because this past Thanksgiving dinner was our 10th annual Jesus Was Homeless, I Love Your Neighbors Thanksgiving Day dinner. And it was just it was a milestone, right? I mean, for us to think of that first Thanksgiving dinner and how far we've come. We could have never imagined where that first dinner would lead to or how our lives would be forever changed because of that. I mean, it's certainly part of our journey together now. And it's really part of our life story. You know, we like to go somewhere where we can totally disconnect, where we can spend time with God, time with each other, just relax and read books. I'm a firm believer that leaders are readers. And one of the books that I read this past week was The Last Arrow by Erwin McManus. And after I had come to faith a few years back, his was one of the first books that I read called The Barbarian Way. And, you know, titles like The Barbarian Way and The Last Arrow are kind of manly titles, so I felt like I could read some of those. But in this book, The Last Arrow, Erwin challenges the reader to not leave any arrows left in our quiver. Basically, he's saying to go all in for God. He says, go big or go home. See, the last arrow, it's about your story, your legacy. What will your story be? What will the story of who you are ultimately going to be tell the world? In many ways, your story, the message of your life, will be the most important thing about you. So are we going to write our story that uses every last arrow, or will we leave some arrows in our quiver? Erwin tells a story in this book that is out of the Old Testament of the Bible. And if you didn't know, the Bible is broken up into an Old Testament and a New Testament. The Old Testament is about life on earth before Jesus, and the New Testament is about life on earth after Jesus. And if you don't have a Bible, we'd love to get you a free Bible. We have free Bibles over here at the connection counter, and you can just grab one off of there. Or if you downloaded that app, there's a link to a Bible in there. But if you don't have a Bible, not a big deal. We're going to put verses up on the screen today. But in this story from the Old Testament, there's a guy by the name of Jehoash. And he is the king of Israel. And the kingdoms are at war between Israel and Judah. They're divided. And his kingdom is being threatened by the armies of Amaziah, king of Judah. The one great advantage, though, that King Jehoash has is that the prophet Elisha is with them. So Elisha has kind of been the protector of the kingdom of Israel. But right now, he is suffering from an illness that will ultimately lead to his death. And King Jehoash goes over and weeps over him, but not so much because of his sorrow for the loss of this great prophet, but really because he's fearing the loss of protection that Elisha will provide the kingdom of Israel. So King Jehoash calls out to Elisha, who's just been this symbol and this source of God's strength and power. But now he's clearly at his end of life. So King Jehoash calls out to him, and Elisha gives him somewhat of an unusual set of instructions. And so we're going to pick it up in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 13, verse 15 through 20. So Elisha told him, "Get a bow and some arrows." And the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, "Put your hand on the bow." And Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands. Then he commanded, "Open that eastern window." And he opened it. And then he said, "Shoot." So he shot an arrow. Elisha proclaimed, "This is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans at Aphek." Then he said, "Now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground." So the king picked up the arrows and struck them 3 times against the ground. But the man of God was angry with him. He said, "You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. Then Elisha died and was buried. And we read that story, and it creates all kinds of questions for us. Questions like, how could the king's future be so affected by whether he struck an arrow 3 times or 5 times or 6 times? Why didn't Elisha explain to him what was required before holding him to its consequences? How could this king have known that 6 is the magic number and that 3 would leave him short? Up to that moment, the king had done everything that Elisha had asked. But when Elisha told him to strike the ground with the arrows, the prophet left the instruction open-ended. And even the text says the man of God was angry with him. So clearly, much more is going on than what meets the eye. See, this was no small mistake. The king began with the promise of a complete victory. And afterward, he was the recipient of far less. And it all centered around one decision. He struck the ground 3 times and then stopped. Or to put it another way, he quit. And the Bible doesn't tell us why he quit. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he felt ridiculous. Maybe he thought it was beneath him. Or perhaps he sensed it was an act of futility. But it was very clear for Elisha that the fact the king stopped striking the arrow was connected to his determination to receive the full measure of God's intention for him. He quit, and the victory was lost. He just didn't want it badly enough. So I wonder how much more good God desires to usher into the world that has been thwarted by our own lack of ambition. I wonder how many times in my own life I thought I failed, but actually the only thing I did was that I quit. What is it about us that stops writing the story before we're finished? What mistakes quitting for failure? What causes us to settle for less? I see too much of this story in my own life. I can identify too many times when I have prayed too little, I've expected too little, and really I've done too little. So the question is, have you become the kind of person who is always looking for the least you can do, trying to do only what is required? Or are you the kind of person who has given up not only on life, but on yourself. When you come to the end of your life, will you be able to say, I gave everything I had? Or will you have a hollow feeling in your soul that you quit too soon, that you expected too little, that you did not strike the last arrow? You know, I read that story and I think many of us hear God say, take your arrows and shoot. But much like the king, we never hear the command, stop striking the ground. We simply stop before we're finished. We stop before God is finished writing our story. So the question each of us must answer is this: am I the kind of person who strikes 3 times and then stops? Or am I the kind of person who commanded to strike? When I am commanded to strike my arrows, I keep striking and I keep striking until there are no arrows left. You know, when we read the Bible, you find all kinds of stories like Jehoash and Elisha all throughout the Bible. You see, God is all about a good story. You know, when you read the Bible, you see where God has taken the messiest of the messy people and he rewrites their future story. You know, and Jesus was the same way. He was all about stories. Jesus would tell stories and parables all throughout the Gospels. See, a story is one of the best ways to explain what God is doing in everything. And we love a good story, like just what we talked about earlier. Sometimes we love them about the popo. But the reason we love stories is because we are made in God's image. And we love the hero's journey. We love good triumphing over evil. I mean, we see, we think, we feel, we remember in stories. And sometimes we can even see our own story inside of another story. So if that is so, it would be helpful to identify where our story is inside of that story. And every great story tends to have kind of a similar path that includes 3 parts. And so if we were to divide up our story, it would look something like this. And this would be part 1. It would be the beginning, the setup, the rise in action to that crucial point, that central event. And then if we looked at part 2, part 2 would be made up of the climax or the crisis or that central event that's really making that story. And if we then journeyed out of our story into part 3, it would be the closing or the outcome or the result of the action that took place in part 2. And last week, John did a fantastic job of really telling what God was doing through the Old Testament. Part 1, where he was leading right up to the birth of Jesus, the Messiah. And then part 2, where Jesus is born. That 33-year stretch, his life, his death, his resurrection, that really forms the central event of the crisis point of God's story. And so part 3 is kind of where we're at. I didn't put a 3 on there, did I? Somebody should have caught that. So part 3 is kind of where we're at, right? It's the 2,000 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And it's our story. It's your life. You're the closing part of the best story ever. And it's still being written today. But my question is, can you tell your story yet? Do you know what your part 1 is? Do you know your beginning, your setup, the rise in action? Do you know your part two? What's been the central event of your life? Has it been a crisis? Has it been a turning point? What about part three, the resolution, the action that has come out of that central point? Could you summarize your life into 3 parts? Many of us would find part two difficult, I think. What is the central event of my life? Is it something I've experienced even yet? Is it finding that one true love, or having a child, or a career job? Sadly, I think many of our part twos might not be what we hope them to be. It might be hurt, or betrayal, or brokenness, or shame, or loss. But perhaps it really could be that turning point, that hinge where life takes a different direction, a core part of the message of our life, whether we like it or not. Regardless of what you know about your own story, here's what you can know. You are invited to bring your story into God's story. No matter what your story has been, the good times, the bad times, you can join the greater story that is happening around you. And just like Jesus' intersection with the story that was creating the central event of human history, your life can be the central event of Jesus' story. You can have an intersection with Jesus. And in the end, from God's perspective, what did you do with your intersection with Jesus? What will your central turning point be once you have that? Did you leave your quiver full or empty? Did you strike the ground 3 times or 6 times? And since it's Christmas time, and since Christmas was the central event of God's story in history in part 2, I want to talk a little bit about some people that had an intersection with Jesus. So in the book of Luke, in chapter 2, verse 3 and 7, we find the story of Mary and Joseph. And they are looking for a room for the night. And they meet the innkeeper. But despite all of what you've maybe seen on TV, Christmas plays, pageants, musicals, the innkeeper is never mentioned or named. See, all we have is the reality that Mary and Joseph had to face, that there was no room for them at the inn. See, the innkeeper, he was probably a busy person. His motel was probably full for the first time in quite a while. And he really didn't have time for Joseph and Mary. There was work to do. He had a family to support. The innkeeper is so busy that he missed this opportunity. He was a person that stood so close to the most famous story in history and yet missed it. And I think there are a lot of innkeepers in our world. People who have a brush with Jesus. God shows up on their doorstep in an unusual form. Maybe it's a health scare. Maybe it's a song on the radio. Maybe it's even an invitation to church. The intersection is there. They are being invited into God's story. But they pass because they don't quite perceive it. They're busy with other things. I think of my own life. How many times did I miss the intersection with Jesus? I was 25 when my first wife was killed in a car accident, yet I didn't actually come to be a follower of Jesus until 36. I was busy. I was trying to be successful. I was taking my daughter to t-ball games. I was missing out on all of these intersections where Jesus was trying to get a hold of my life. See, sometimes the central event of your life isn't what happened, it's what you missed. Then we read about King Herod in the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 1 through 7. He's a Jewish ruler who's been allowed a measure of power from the Roman government. When 3 wise men from the east show up asking about this newborn king of the Jews because they saw this star in the sky. Well, King Herod doesn't like that. He takes it as a personal insult. Another king to him is a threat. And so he concocts a plan to locate Jesus and to kill him. When he can't find Jesus, he decides to have every newborn baby in the city of Bethlehem killed just to cover his bases. See, he's intersecting with the story God is writing. He's on the scene with Jesus, and yet he resists it. And while very few people really take resistance of Jesus to that extreme, I think there are many people who respond with opposition of the heart. The idea of bowing down to someone, giving over control of your life to someone who claims to be king is utterly annoying. The mystical aspects of stars in the sky, God acting in human history, it all sounds just too kind of fantastic, like a crutch for people who can't deal with reality. They even devote time to try to discredit Jesus in arguments. They show contempt for those who have claimed to have had an interaction with Jesus. Sometimes the central event of your life winds up being fighting and explaining away or an opposition to your story that God is writing. Then we see a third story of Mary in Luke chapter 1, verse 26 through 28. The woman selected to be the mother of Jesus. So if anyone has ever had a strange story, it's got to be Mary. At about age 15, she's promised in marriage to this good guy across the village by the name of Joseph, right? They're starting to pick out curtains for their new place and set up honeymoon plans and renting a camel limousine for the reception. When Mary runs into this guy named Gabriel. Gabriel turns out to be an angel from God. And he tells her that she is going to get pregnant as a virgin with the Son of God who is going to save the world. Pretty bizarre, right? But it happens. And being the mother of Jesus turned out to be the wildest ride of her life. She's watching him grow up and watching him preach and teach and go from town to town and heal people. And then it also turns out to be the most difficult and painful time of her life. She watches him being beaten and tortured and crucified. And then it goes to being the most wonderful and joyous time of her life, seeing him raised up to life again. See, Mary's intersection with Jesus turns out to be the central event of her life, and it transforms everything about her. When she had that first encounter with the angel Gabriel, he tells her in the New Testament of the Bible, in the book of Luke, chapter 1, verse 37 through 38, "For nothing is impossible with God." Amen. Mary responded, "I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true." And then the angel left her. Mary, she responds with openness and a measure of trust. And she gets to discover firsthand that nothing is impossible with God. A virgin birth, the Son of God, the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus. By trusting God, her story gets written into the best story ever. See, Jesus' intersection becomes her intersection. While Mary's intersection is unique, all of us are invited to bring our story into God's story. We're invited to come closer to Jesus, to learn to trust him, to let him intersect our lives and change it all. So I want to introduce you to somebody who's had that very intersection happen. I want to introduce you to Carla. Many of you know Carla because she works for Jesus Was Homeless, and she's probably drugged you kicking and screaming either to Jobs for Life or to church or even your own sobriety. But I want you to hear about her experience of her intersection with Jesus. Please welcome Carla. Grab a seat there. All right, Carla, so you and I have talked about what it was like having a relationship with Jesus, even though you were kind of in your addiction and being a criminal and everything out there. So kind of explain how that really works.
I've been running from myself.
There we are. There. Check. There you go.
I've kind of been running for myself. I was wanted in Arkansas. I was actually on Arkansas's Most Wanted. I ran for like 7 years. And I was in a motel room, the Hollister Inn. I think they've condemned it now. I don't think it's in operation. But I was sitting in there and really high, and I was having this conversation with God because I could see like the future. And, my grandkids, I wasn't able to see them. Wasn't having any kind of contact with my family. And I was just miserable, but I was having this bargain with God that for right now I'm going to keep getting high because it stops everything I feel up here. It stops everything that I think about, all the horrible things that had happened to me, all the horrible things that I'd done, the shame and all that stuff. It made it go away. So I said, God, I'm going to keep getting high until they catch me because I knew I was going to get caught. So right now, I'm going to keep getting high until they catch me, but once they catch me and I go to prison, because I knew I was going to go to prison when they caught me, and I hoped I wouldn't catch a new charge, but I did. So I was going to keep getting high, and once I go to prison and I get out of prison, I'm going to live wholeheartedly for you because I couldn't see myself as a grandma still putting a needle in my arm. And so 2 weeks later, I was arrested. He has a sense of humor.
Yeah. So then how did that work? So you were arrested, then what happened? How did you go from kind of living that lifestyle, not being obedient to God, to then fulfilling that bargain, I guess, that you made?
I knew that I had to be locked up in order to get away from drugs. My body was so used to it. I'd done it for 30-something years. So it was going to take actually being physically locked up in a place I couldn't leave for me to stay clean. And then I knew God would do what he needed to do. So they held me for 10 days in Taney County Jail. And on the 10th day, when I thought I was going to get out, these extradition officers came, and one of them actually was a chaplain, so it was really wild. So I went down to Arkansas, and I got my time. I did a year down there. I was actually the chapel clerk. I knew that it was happening. So I got really close to God, and I knew that things could be different. So when I got out, Taney County came back and got me because I did catch a new charge. And I came up here, and I stayed clean 3 days from being a year. And because I didn't have a good support team, because I didn't have a good foundation, I ended up using it again and caught another charge. And at that time, I was looking at 2 life sentences plus 14 years.
So what happened when you had that intersection, though, that really turned the corner for you?
Well, I never felt that I was worth loving. I never felt that I was good enough, from a lot of things that happened in my past to things that I'd done to other people in my addiction. I just felt that I was a filthy person, that I was not good enough. So luckily, I got to go to rehab. And I was trying to be a martyr in rehab, tell all these young women not be like me, so they didn't go down the path that I did. And we were sitting in process group, and my counselor said, so what makes you think that you don't deserve to be happy, that you don't deserve a good life, that you can't have recovery too? And I just felt arms from heaven. I can't even explain what happened other than it's like one of those miracles in the Bible. God loved me up in his arms, and he told me that I was worth saving, that he loved me, and that my life mattered, to him, and that he could make a difference through me if I would just sell out for him 100%.
And boy, has he, huh?
And man, let me tell you. I never knew that this kind of love even existed. Everything that I had associated with love had strings attached. It had conditions and requirements and rules. Last week when John talked about there was maybe a special place if you just hold yourself just accountable and you just love God, not with another helpmate, but just God is your helpmate. That's what I'm striving for. I don't think that any man on this earth or woman or child or anything can ever compare to the love I feel with God and what he's doing in my life and through my life. Man, I don't want to share my time with God with nobody,
That's awesome.
I'm kind of selfish that way.
So how would you encourage somebody who is maybe missing that intersection with Jesus?
Trust him. Know that he's not like a man. He don't lie, and he never fails. He's always like, I bargained with him, and he showed me, and even today, he still shows me. I still struggle with not feeling good enough and not being worthy, but I'm worthy of his love. He died on my worst day out there for me, and for me, that speaks volumes. And what he's done in my life, I feel like I'm the richest person in the whole world, because what I have inside now, money can't buy, and I just try to love on as everybody that comes to that door. I pray every morning be less of me and more of him, and for me to be the heart that he wants me to be to those people, and be the arms that hugs them no matter what state of mind and condition they're in, because I needed that love, and so I just try to be the person I wish would have been there for me. And God's allowing me to do that through this.
And selfless plug here, but Jobs for Life was a big part of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I didn't know how to live legal. I had either been with a controlling, abusive man who controlled everything, or I had been in street survival mode, where it's just survival of the fittest. You don't have the money, hit a lick, steal something, take it back to Walmart, get the money, those sort of things. I didn't know how to trust him fully. And Buddy, through a mentor, somebody working with me, facing all those roadblocks. And they said if you're honest that you can recover. And so I was going to put him to the test. So when I come into Jobs for Life, I probably I didn't know how to live. So the shame was gone, because I'd done everything that I could have done out there while I was using. So what did I have to lose but to be honest? So I was just laying it out there. These are my facts. This is what I'm facing.
Right.
You said you can help me. Can you help me? And Buddy, one thing at a time, Sharon was my mentor. And I didn't want her at first because she was hard. But that's exactly what I needed, somebody to not let me get by with crap, because I was a manipulator. Yeah. And so facing the roadblocks that I did, and it just kept doing what I was doing, I finally realized that, I have a love and I have a gift of helping people. And so the one thing I thought I was going to do didn't end up being real estate. It turned out to be, helping people. And
Yeah.
now I get to help people every day. But it was instrumental in me facing the roadblocks because I had so much baggage and wreckage, and it just looked overwhelming. You know, I'd created a huge mess out there. And you know, that said that you can eat an elephant if you just do it one bite at a time.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of hit my past, was one bite at a time, one thing at a time. Finally, I'm down to single digits on probation. I've got 9 months left, and it'll be it'll be the first time since 1992 that I've been off paper. Just saying. Man, so it's a huge thing. I've, you know, leaps and bounds, but it wouldn't have been without Jobs for Life. I wouldn't know how to even face those things. Two of my 4 children are back in my life. My grandchildren are back in my life. It's just amazing.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for sharing, Carla. I love you.
Well,
She is such an inspiration for our staff here, I tell you what. So what's your story? Every great story has 3 parts. So what's the beginning? What's the central event? What's the resolution or the outcome look like? Most importantly, what has your intersection with Jesus look like? Maybe if you can't identify it, would you be open to having one? Because the invitation is wide open to all. See, the angels told the shepherds at Christmas, I bring good news of great joy to all people. So I want to challenge you today to try to articulate or tell your story. Identify the 3 parts. If you had to tell someone your story of your life so far, how would you tell it to them? See, so many people breeze through their entire time on earth, and they never stop to think about the story of their life. You know, much less the story that they're part of, the bigger story. So what is your story? Can you tell it in 3 parts? And if you're already a follower of Jesus, this isn't optional. See, knowing your story is essential because you are meant to share it as a follower of Jesus. Your account of your intersection with Jesus is often the beginning of someone else's invitation to God's story. See, in our world, we're in need of people who will tell others what the intersection of Jesus can do to their life, because there's remarkable power in it. Your transparency, your honesty, like Carla's, gives other people courage to be honest and to be hopeful. So, if you've got it in you, I want to challenge you to share your story with 3 different groups this week. So, number 1, I want to challenge you to share your story with someone you know but doesn't know your story. So, number 1 is share your story with someone you know but doesn't know your story. Number 2 is share your story with someone you just meet. You don't know them, they don't know you, share your story. And then number 3 is share it via social media. So share your story, parts 1, 2, and 3 on social media, and use the hashtag #BestStoryEver. Put your story out there. Share your stories, friends. There's freedom and there's life in it. Most importantly, though, bring your stories. Bring them into the best story ever. The story that God is writing. the good, the bad, the ugly, the ups, the downs, the sorrows, the joys. See, everything finds its true place and finds lasting restoration in God's story. Don't leave your quiver full. Use all of your arrows so that you can say, I gave everything I had. The band's going to come up here and they're going to sing some songs to God and for God and about God. And you can sit or stand. We'll put the words up on the screen so you can sing along. And we don't pressure you to give here, which is why we don't even pass an offering bucket. But if Gateway is your church home, give out of the gratitude of everything that God has done for you. You can give online at our website at gatewaybranson.org or at the buckets and giving stations in the back. And if you're new here today and Gateway is not your church home yet, this is just our gift to you. And if you would like someone to pray with you and for you, we'll have people by the garage door over here to your left and this door over here to your right. But don't leave yet. Let this song be your first step in your life being intersected by Jesus. And then boldly owning and sharing your story with others. Listen to the band.